Mettez les masques. Mettez les masques. Mettez les masques.
Il y a des partout. Hein. Voilà. Bien. On peut y aller? Tout le monde est prêt? Bien, mesdames et messieurs, le résultat de ce second tour a démenti tous les sondages et d'où jouer.
So I thought I'd start with that. That was a pretty funny thing going back to the COVID days, but was the reality of it, right? As Cat Turd put it, one big scam. But the reality was that that's what we go, you know. Just like Boris Johnson in the UK hosting parties when everybody else was locked in their house. One of the reasons why he had to resign. Here you have, that was either France or Quebec, I'm not entirely sure. But the whole point of the matter is there. So, and the funny thing is like there was another study, the eighth one, came out with negative things about the COVID vax, okay, in terms of how it has susceptibility to other types of viruses, hence the increase of RSVs that adults are not supposed to get, and other types of flus, okay, and then the best is, Colbert the other day said something about RFK Jr., about whatever. NIH, says it saved 5.5 million lives. Well, how do you measure that? How do you know that? Okay, the kind of assumptions in a model to do that, and plus consider the source. That was NIH is what Fauci was in charge of. Okay, so, he's not a trusted source. He's the one who pushed the vax, suppressed other types of treatments because you needed that for the emergency authorization. Okay, under American law. So, this just kind of thing reminds, we have to remind ourselves what we went through and how the institutions can be dangerous to our rights. How the government put pressure on social media to force out dissenting voices, the nonsense of the masks that just submicron viruses go right through. And these people were in there, they knew it, and they put the masks on to show the public. It was about control. It was about the 2020 election. Okay, it was about money. So, we can never let this go. And I really wish the Trump administration would do more on this front and the investigations up to this. Now, he's the one who put in Operation Warp Speed. So I think he's hesitant to do anything about that. But the fact of the matter is that it's not his fault that the COVID vaccine didn't work, right? It was after the election that they said they got it. Okay, it didn't roll out, so basically he left the presidency. So it's not on him. He could say, "Listen, you failed at the contract. It's not safe. It's not effective. It didn't stop transmission." End of story. So anytime something jumps out at me on COVID, I'm going to try to share with you so you guys understand the nonsense, okay? And like anything else, you also want accountability as a prevention tool so it never happens again. So anyway, it is Monday, August 11th, and it is about 8:30 Eastern Standard Time in East Tennessee. So let's jump right in. Some good news. I always try to start out with some good news, especially on the tariff front. Here we go. John Deere to invest $20 billion in the United States for manufacturing. That's awesome. Okay. Big capital orders. They make large products, right? Expensive products, products we need for agriculture right here in the United States. And that will provide massive amounts of jobs. And you're going to put these factories, right, in smaller towns that once had factories that went away, where people have more options. And this is what the tariffs are all about. So I'm glad that happened. So let's move on. And it's an iconic company, John Deere. So I'm glad they did that, right? John Deere Green. All right. Moving on. Okay. Well, economics. The U.S. economy is heavily reliant on wealthy individuals. Since Q4 2019, personal spending, by the way, that was the highest quarter of growth, or at that point of the Trump administration, in terms of wages. Okay, that's where blue collar wages were highest, non-supervisory white collar wages were highest. Okay, wealthy people made money, wages went up as well, but it was a much higher percentage for that. And that is the goal. Okay. You want, as a healthy nation, a strong middle class. Okay. Since Q4 2019, personal spending has risen 50% in the top 20% of U.S. households. Now, that's also asset inflation. Okay, the reduction of the purchasing power of the dollar by 25 to 30%. Okay, and the reason why it's fueling up towards the top is because that inflation has hurt the majority of Americans who are now spending more of their income for things they need to buy: food, meat, toothpaste, household products, car insurance. Okay, so they're not spending money on cool stuff on Amazon or Best Buy, right? Okay, or getting a nicer car, all right, because of that asset inflation. And their incomes have been inflated, and their houses have went up in value, and their 401ks and non-qualified investment accounts and everything like that have gone up. So meanwhile, the middle class and bottom 40%'s consumer expenditures have increased by just 25%, or half that pace. That is the money that they need to keep up with inflation just to live. By comparison, prices have increased 24% on average during that same period. See what I'm saying here? That 25% equal. They're just keeping up. So what the share of money that's going into the economy to grow it, right? Because like stocks, you have defensive stocks, right? Those are your Procter and Gambles and things like that produce things you need. Okay, they don't have huge growth potentials. They might have a good dividend, whatever. They don't have huge growth potentials. Okay, and those are the stocks that, yeah, they're getting increased revenue because the cost of the product is more, but the majority of Americans are not spending money on that. Okay, so what's happening is all the other parts of the economy that would be growth stocks and would be luxury items, fun items, we'll call them. Okay, only the wealthy can afford that. Okay, and even though they got hit by inflation, as I said, it's they've made more than the inflation that are on the costs of their daily living. They've made up in the inflation of the assets in the stock market, their house, etc., their wage increases in the white collar sphere. Okay. In other words, the bottom 80% of households are barely keeping up with inflation on their spending growth. That's right. So the percentage share that's of that economy is just being done by 20% of the country. So basically 20% of the country is now holding up the economy versus where you have a strong middle class that pushes it up. Okay? Overall, the top 10% of earners now drive 50% of all consumer spending, up from 36% 3 decades ago, according to Moody's. That's not good, folks. I think that's what we're trying to reverse with reindustrialization, bringing John Deere back, the tariffs, trying to get rid of corruption in D.C., etc. All right. Now here's a chart related to that. The U.S. economy depends on consumption by the rich. Growth in personal spending to income groups versus inflation. See? The wealth gap is widening. Okay? And it will flatline, I believe, under Trump, but we have to get it to shrink. And that's not going to happen until you get spending under control, the Federal Reserve under control, and you reindustrialize. To support this, largest 10% of U.S. stocks now make up 76% of market cap. Highest concentration in history. That's your few big, huge companies, your Nvidias, your Apples, your Googles. You can't just have this. Our economy, core economy, be based off like 5 companies, 10 companies. Okay? That's because of that gap, because people are not spending money on other things. Okay? And yes, they'll have some, companies that make parts for another company and things like that. Your small cap stocks, whatever, they're kind of being there. But particularly on the other side, it's just their revenues are being fueled by the increase of the cost of their product, not because they're selling more units. Okay, we want the growth of our stock market to be based upon profits, and we want it being across all indexes, the Russell 2000, the S&P 500, not just like the Dow. All right. So, moving on to breaking. Former FBI employees are warning that mass firings have begun at the Bureau. Good, Robert Barnes says in his retweet of Ein Jaeger. That's true. Because even though you take over, this is what people don't get. Even though you take over the head of the organization, of the right people at top, you still have the institutionalized bureaucratic people. I don't care if it's the Department of Agriculture, Department of Treasury, or even the FBI. The FBI, we know from the Russia hoax and everything like that, and the pressuring, as I said earlier in this video, of social media and things like that, okay? And the raids on Mar-a-Lago, you still have to have complicit, career-oriented bureaucrats, right? And what are they? That's why Fairfax County, Virginia is so blue, and Montgomery County, Maryland is so blue because of all these employees. And that includes FBI agents. You have to gut the FBI. You have to get it. And the Obama administration, the Biden administration, they used to do recruiting at like gay pride events, areas where they knew there would be left-wing people who would want to come and do the bidding of the administrative state. Okay? And that's not how we're supposed to be. They're supposed to do their job from the top. So when you have these guys at the top, you're going to have FBI agents, the lower levels of management, dragging their feet, slow walking these things to try to, bide their time and just wait out Trump, okay? But if you can't just change the top. You have to change the institutions within. If you don't get rid of them at all or restructure them, you at least have to get rid of the employees. So this is good. And I also heard something similar in the EPA. Half the employees union, which was totally left-wing, whatever, their contract's up, and it's creating a lot of flexibility for Lee Zeldin and things like that. That's the kind of things we need to do. We have to change the culture, change the people, restructure, and do that if you want long-lasting things, right? This 4 years of Trump should just be the start. Okay? He's transitional, and then we get the next person who's transformative, okay? Next piece. All right, this is something that was me because I'm an animal guy, okay? The owners of Peanut the squirrel have filed a $10 million lawsuit against the state of New York for the wrongful killing of Peanut the squirrel and his companion, a raccoon named Fred. If you don't know, months back, New York State Animal Control went to this guy, took these two animals and euthanized them. Okay, he made a lot of videos. He was fundraising for animal rescues, whatever. He happened to be a MAGA guy. So the state of New York decided to kill these. Would they've done it? And these are people supposed to be animal rights activists and left-wingers, right? Okay, that's who these people are. That's why I left New York. Believe me, these people will put you in a camp. They will. Okay, right now they have problems with the Supreme Court and things like that. If they get their way, you are going to lose your kids. You're going to end up in a camp, a re-education camp. That's who these people are. They are content with one-party rule because all that matters at the end of the day are their left-wing policies. And they are willing to contradict their own beliefs in animal rights and kill these two cute animals that this guy trained, showed affection for. And I hope not only they get sued, but I hope they can find some criminal aspects on it because it's really sick. But it just shows you who these people are. Now, breaking. J.D. Vance just called on Elon Musk to come back into MAGA before the midterms. Huge. I think it's a mistake for him to try to break the president. My hope is that by the time of the midterms, he's kind of come back into the fold. I absolutely love this MAGA voice. I agree. The American Party is a bad idea, particularly on the margins. But you know what? Elon Musk represents something of that Trump 2024 electorate. That coalition, whether it's Maha types, anti-establishment types, younger professionals who maybe lean kind of libertarian. They don't watch Fox News, CNN. They get their news from podcasts and social media, these millennials and Zoomers. You also have the working class groups in there that are disproportionately minority, okay? Not majority, but, a chunk of young working class black males, Hispanic males, particularly on the young side. Things like that. And then you have these anti-establishment types. These are the people that are not going to come out for the Republicans in 2026 unless you give them a reason to. These are the people whose poll numbers, that 18 to 29 group that went from 55 down to 30. That's these people. And these people have the affinity to listen to Musk, particularly the non-working class side of these people. Okay, so I think it's important to bring them in. And that is only, and Vance knows this because he's been talking to people behind the scenes about poll numbers, about these groups. And there are people there that still like Musk, his ingenuity and so forth. While there's bad blood, I don't think it is totally bad blood because they have gone back and forth. But we want him to stop this America party, bring him into the fold, and make the necessary changes within. If Musk is upset with the spending, well, then let him get in there and push Freedom Caucus people in the primaries. That is a good way Elon Musk can go. Get these real people who want to do really something good about spending. That's where he can put his muscle in the primaries. And keep these people who kind of follow Musk in the process, in the fold, and come out. I was at my Republican group meeting, and the president, she said, well, Trump, they don't show up when Trump's not on the ballot. That's not Republicans sitting home. It's a different coalition than a midterm coalition. These people aren't frequent voters. Some of them are first-time voters. Some of them first came in. I just named two groups to you before. It's a different electorate, okay? So it's not just getting Republicans out. These people aren't Republicans, many of them, most of them, right? They're independents, ancestral Democrats. They don't want to be Democrats, but they're not going to come out. They might be anti-establishment and so forth, okay? And it's the foreign policy issues. It could be spending. I believe it's Ukraine war, the Israeli-Gaza thing. It's the bombing of Iran. I think that hurt with the group of these people. It's one of the reasons why I keep pushing Maha a lot, because that's an area that these people, I believe, are all about. And it's just because it's not as juicy as the other stuff, it's not getting that news. And I try to put out as much good stuff that's happening on the Maha front. So I hope JD's right on that. I want to get Elon back. And plus his money. Hello. All right. So this is a little Ukraine war update, okay? Because of the summit that's coming up. So I want to give you this first. So if you want to see this, this is on the left here. This is Pokrovsk is in this cauldron on the southwest with these two arrows coming up. Okay, and around it. Now, in this developing cauldron is Konstantinivka. Okay, and to the north of it is Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. Okay, those are the two cities circled in the map on the right. So if I want you to look to the left here. Okay, these brown and two arrows on the far left here that showing the Russian advance. This huge gain, that's happened in the last 24 hours. 24 to 48 hours. They really did a push, which is a little bit, because they thought, everybody's kind of thinking that they're just going to continue to come around and circle this whole area in the southwest, and the same thing with Konstantinivka. But instead, it's looking like Russia is driving north. Now, there are some Ukrainian belts down here of defensive belts. They've bypassed some, from what I understand. Sounds like what I'm hearing is that Ukraine just doesn't have the manpower to really act, and they can go around these positions. At the same time, they are in Pokrovsk, and they are still circling around all these arrows. Now, by the way, this is maps coming from Deep State, if you don't know, who is a pro-Ukrainian mapper who's very accurate. Okay, so it's not, and he verifies it on all sides and stuff before it. So this is good. This is one of the reasons why I think they went back from, remember, Trump did the 50 days, not the 10, 12, because the situation on the battlefield is not looking good for Ukraine at all. Okay, and the map on the right is showing is that there were strikes on these two yellow roads here that go to Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. It's almost like, the strategy where we would do island hopping in the Pacific War in World War II. The Russia knows that Pokrovsk is going to fall, just which is probably by a week left before it falls. Konstantinivka a little bit more. But it looks like they're going for the home run. That they're actually going to start driving north here, really start heading towards Kramatorsk and Slavyansk, forcing a chaotic withdrawal out of both Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, possibly getting them trapped behind lines. I don't know, but it looks like they're moving a little more aggressively now. So I'm going to really keep an eye on that, especially see what happens between now and the summit in Alaska on Friday. So, yeah, I have not seen movements like that since the beginning, we'll say Russia has not made gains like that since the failed Ukrainian summer offensive of 2023. They just did not make that kind of a gain and that kind of a spearhead. You know, I've seen 3 kilometers here in one day, 2 kilometers here in one day. I mean, this is 10 kilometers in one day, 2 days. So that's a huge gain. All right. And keep in mind, once these 2 cities fall at Donetsk, it's like open farmland. And you start to get behind the defensive belts that were built in the first war in 2014, 2015. So that's the deal. So let's just talk about this Alaska summit, okay? It's very interesting when I keep hearing that you don't really have a summit until there's some sort of agreement already done behind the scenes with all parties. The Europeans and the Ukrainians want to be involved in there because they want to keep the war going, okay? And they don't want to cede any of these territories. The occupied territories, except for a pocket here, a pocket there, are never going back to the Ukraine. I don't care what happens. Okay, the only way I could ever see that is if there was a direct European war with the United States and NATO against Russia. Without that, these territories are not going back. But the problem is, Zelensky says it's part of his constitution. Well, it's part of Russia's constitution after the referendum that these 4 oblasts are part of Russia. Now, Luhansk is already taken. Donetsk is going to be done, in my opinion, at the rate it's going. Maybe not Kramatorsk and Sloviansk by the fall or winter, but very close to it. And that'll be the last of it. Krovsk will fall, Konstantinivka will fall, and then those 2 last cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk and Donetsk. And then they have another 30% of Kherson and another 30% of Zaporozhye. So they're almost already there. Now, what I think Trump's talking about with the land swap is that because of the incursions in Belgorod, Russia proper, and the Kursk invasion, after that, Russia moved more into the Kharkiv region, more into the Sumy region, and also, as I mentioned, into the Dnipro-Petrovsk region, which is north of Zaporozhye and northwest of Donetsk. So I think what he's talking about is, we'll swap those. You can give those back to Ukraine, and then Ukraine will then pull out of the remaining of those original 4 oblasts. Okay? And I think that's the swap he's talking about. But, with Zelensky trying to get there, I don't think it's grief. Plus, he has a problem on the home front with the ultranationalists if he were to concede that, Zelensky. Putin has a problem from his right in Russia if he concedes that. Now, if Ukraine, and I had mentioned this about the defensive belts, out of all of the Donbass, and Zaporozhye, and Kherson, there's not a lot of fortifications there. So from a Ukrainian security point of view, there is a possibility that then Ukraine's we could be more vulnerable if Russia doesn't honor it, and they decide to go for more, 2 years from now, okay, in those territories. However, the reason why Russia up north went into Sumy, went into some of these areas of Kharkov, one, I think, was also to open another front, spreading the defenses of Ukraine even thinner, but also to create a buffer so Ukraine doesn't do these incursions into Russia proper. Okay? So if they could do that, spread them thin, it gave them a buffer to Russia proper. Because they used to hit towns like Rostov-on-Don, and they'd go into Belgorod and launch drones and missiles, etc. And they went into, as you know, the Kursk offensive, okay, which did not trigger a major reaction by Russia. They went slow and just pretended it was part of the front. And they did what they normally do, that slow steamroller, okay? So I don't really know what's going to happen. I do know the characters. I hope Zelensky's not there. He should be informed about what's going on in the decision making. This territory swap's not going to be. I heard Larry Johnson say that he looks like the Trump administration still doesn't 100% get it's purely about territory. It's not. They don't want American missiles in Ukraine. End of story. I.e. not in NATO as well. Okay? That's the reason that, and plus of the other issues involving the Donbass when they separated after 2014 coup and the first war, and the fact that the ultranationalists who basically control Ukraine were trying to Ukrainize the Russian-speaking people of the Donbass. Okay, so all these factors need to come in. Now, one of the big things, the denazification, which is removing these ultranationalists from power, to me shouldn't be as important to Russia anymore. Because the threat of that was to the Russian-speaking people of the East. Well, now if you've taken these 4 territories where most of the Eastern-speaking people are, it's going to change your voting, right? Because when Yanukovych won, it was the further west you went, the more pro-Ukraine you were. Further east, the more neutral you wanted to be, or closer to Russia, right? Well, if you take out, 25% of your population is now under Russia, they're not going to vote for the anti-Ukraine position. So by definition, so it really shouldn't affect them. One of the things I suggested in any deal is 100 days. Anybody on the Ukraine side who wants to move to the Russian side, anybody from the Russian side wants to move to the Ukraine side, let them do that freely, so no one's trapped behind whatever. I don't know, create an algorithm where you could swap houses or something like that. But that would be a cool term, so you don't have that ethnic problem going in. But it'll be interesting to see what goes on and what the demands are. Russia has been very consistent. The June 14th, 2024 position has been very clear. 4 oblasts, no NATO. Now, could be more. Okay? But one thing is that Trump has cards to play when it comes to Ukraine, because we can cut intelligence, we can cut contractors, we can cut aid, which our stocks are really running low, especially supporting Israel, and we can cut money. And that'll hasten the collapse. And we know there are massive desertions because the Ukrainian leaders said they're averaging 500 a day, on top of the 1,000 deaths and wounded combined a day. Okay? Well, when people get the word out on the front that U.S. is cutting weapons, they're going to be like, this war is going to be over in 3 months. So they're going to why am I going to risk my life knowing that? So the desertions will increase. More Ukrainian commanders will surrender when given the option to, and it would collapse. So Trump has leverage on the Ukraine, but he's not using it because of the Europeans. Okay? That's why I don't want Zelensky there. Okay? Because Trump should let Zelensky know, we'll cut you off. That's the leverage. We have no leverage over Russia. Sanctioning other countries for buying Russian products is only going to push those countries closer to Russia. So that doesn't work. And Russia operates outside the sanction. They've been sanctioned for years. They're fine. All the money's been repatriated back home. That's what fueled some of their economic growth, because it rose capital in the banks, increased lending. That's why they got through that inflation relatively quickly. And they had 4% growth. And the oil doesn't matter, because I've shown the chart that Bloomberg put up on one of my videos where revenues are the same. Their increased revenue from oil and gas, it's coming from the growth of their economy, other sources. Okay, they just shifted that part, instead of west, east. Okay, so that's the position I would take. Trump, basically, I don't like to use the term threatened, but use your leverage over Zelensky to force him to make the exceptions. I think that territory swap is a good idea, because I think Russia will go, I'm vulnerable up north. Well, they're more vulnerable in the south. So that vulnerability is balances out a bit. And then the true Russian areas come back in, and then no NATO at all. So, and then work out the details. All right. So we'll see how that goes. So, I just wanted to do my first video, give you an update on the battlefield. Not looking good for Ukraine. A few of those headlines, so forth. So I'll be keeping an eye out on the battlefront. See what happens in Konstantinivka, Pokrovsk. This little new drive that Russia's doing that I just showed you. See how well that does before the summit. Any other news that comes out on that international front. We also got this Occupy Gaza position, which I understand the members, IDF High Command is not in favor of this. So we'll see that. Even here, Huckabee's pissed about some stuff. So go figure on that front. It's just a no-win situation on that. So we'll keep an eye on that front. Any more tariff news, economic news that might come out. Still following the politics and the primaries. Remember, we want Dan's in South Carolina, Morris in Kentucky. And I'll be following that. We got some European elections around the corner in October, so I'll start following the poll numbers soon, and I'll probably give some updates on that. So you can follow me on my X at Patriot Planner 1 and on my Getter at Patriot Planner. All right, so if you like this video, please like, follow, and share. And have a great week. I'll probably put out a video on Thursday or Friday. All right, have a good night.